Okay, I think we'll get started. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us at this evening's session, which is around third sector careers for new graduates. My name is Tom, and I'm Graduate Employability Officer at the University of Leeds Careers Service. And I'm joined by my colleagues, Natalie and Flo, who won't be on camera, but will be in the background and in the chat and in the Q&A. So yeah, we've got two great speakers today for you, talking about their experiences of working in the third sector. And they're both Leeds graduates. But before we introduce them, I just wanted to very quickly highlight the Graduate Outcomes Survey, which is a survey that you'll all receive as university graduates. So it helps us to support future university students by asking about what you got up to since graduation and to what extent university experience has helped you. So it takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete, and you'll get it around sort of 15 months after you graduate. So if you do see that, whether you're a graduate and it's coming up soon, or whether you're a student and this is in the future, please do take the time to fill it in if you possibly can. It just really helps the university as a whole change sort of what we're doing to support future students better. But now that I've gone through that, I will briefly introduce both our panelists today. So we're joined by Jess Freitas, who is Relationships and Engagement Officer at Fumble. We've got Ollie Walkden, who's Comms Manager at Young Citizens. How today's session is going to work is they'll both spend a bit of time talking about themselves and what they do at the moment and how they got to where they are. And then after they've both spoken, we'll go into a Q&A at the end. We've had a few questions pre-submitted, but there is a Q&A function at the top. So if you've got any questions for either Jess or Ollie or both while they're talking, please do feel free to drop it in the Q&A at the top at any point, and we'll get on to them at the end. And yeah, any other things in the chat. But without further ado, we'll hand over to our first speaker. Over to you, Jess.
Thank you. Yeah, so a little bit of context about me and the job that I do. So I graduated from Leeds back in September. I did my master's in gender studies there, and then straight before that I did my undergrad in sociology. So the job that I have now I found whilst I was finishing my master's, so obviously context slightly a little bit different to you guys. So I am Relationships and Engagement Officer at Fumble, which is a digital sex education charity. They're based in Sheffield / kind of remotely. So I still live in Leeds and work mostly remotely. The team is very small. There's literally 5 of us, including myself. It's very small, and I guess just out of the startup phase for a little bit of context about Fumble. If I could have the next slide, please, I will tell you about how I found the job. I feel like everything that I'm going to say today is stuff that you've either heard or you're just not going to want to hear, because I know that I didn't want to hear it. First thing being LinkedIn. When I was in my undergrad, I remember everyone was like, okay, you need to get on LinkedIn. And I was like, I don't want to do that. It doesn't sound fun and appealing. And yeah, but I put that aside, and now I use LinkedIn quite frequently. And that is kind of how I found the job at Fumble. I found Fumble on LinkedIn, and then basically one day just sat down and did a load of if you follow or connect with organizations on LinkedIn, obviously they'll give you recommended, suggested, otherwise organizations. So I kind of followed a load of them and set up job alerts for them. And then when the grad role, which is technically the placement that I'm doing, came out, I got a notification from LinkedIn and be like, Fumble are hiring. So I have to give it to LinkedIn. That's how I found the job. And similarly, signing up to the Fumble newsletter, they also sent around an email about it. So if you find any kind of small organizations that you want to work for, stuff like that is really good. So following them on LinkedIn or signing up to their newsletters, because obviously, I don't know, I found that most of the charities that I applied for, they weren't on places like Indeed and big places like that, just because they don't really have the capacity to be. So they're often on a lot more smaller scale. So you have to go to them and find them either from their newsletter, LinkedIn, or also social media. So this is a screenshot from, I didn't follow Fumble on Instagram at the time, but they also put it out on their Instagram. So I would take some time to do that. If you don't know specifically who you want to work for, just kind of any charity and stuff, just go, because the same thing on Instagram too. If you follow one charity, you'll get loads of recommended similar ones, and it's just a great way to kind of start a little loop about who is around you, who could you work for, and obviously see when they're hiring. Sorry, I just realized that I can't see the notes that I wrote down. I'm just going to get them up. There's something that I thought was quite interesting when I was looking for jobs in the charity sector, is that a lot of the applications, obviously I can't say that this is guaranteed across the board, but a lot of the applications are more about your kind of commitment to the cause and your interest in the topic, rather than tell us about a time when you have done this job before, which is what a lot of, dare I say, more kind of corporate jobs, their applications sound like. So these were the questions that they asked me on my application. There wasn't really anything about when have you done this before. It was more about what was my kind of interest in the topic and like the things that I thought were important. And obviously they wanted to basically see that I knew what was going on and I was up to date with like the kind of political climate around the issue and that sort of thing, which I think is maybe kind of encouraging for you guys. Like if you don't have any direct experience doing kind of what this job would be asking you to do, you can draw on other stuff, whether it's just kind of interest that you have outside of uni or jobs that you're currently doing. And also anything that's kind of relevant. Like I spoke a lot about my research from uni. I'm very lucky in that since about midway through my undergrad, I knew that this is what I wanted to do, at least for now. Obviously, might change my mind. But I knew that I wanted to work in sex ed, so like I knew that that's what I was looking for, and I tailored most of my uni research and like the focus of my master's to that. So obviously I could draw on that. But that's not to say that if you didn't do that, that, you know, it's going to be really difficult. Obviously, you can just draw on the experience that you have elsewhere and obviously talk about why you care about the cause that the charity is working towards. Also, just another thing in terms of like finding the job, unfortunately, it's a bit more ad hoc than, you know, kind of like the big placements that kind of, you know, they come up for Christmas and you know when to apply and stuff. It is just kind of on a more ad hoc basis and also related to funding. Like I know for Fumble, whether they decide to do another graduate placement this year is really just dependent on if they get certain types of funding that they can put towards it. So it does mean that it can be a bit of a longer process, but obviously don't be disheartened if I kind of thought it's like, oh, I'll find my job for when I graduate in maybe like the January or the February of last year, and I didn't. I found it in September, basically right before I graduated. So just don't worry if it takes you a bit longer than you think. Obviously, I know the timeline is different now as they say that, but like, yeah, it might just take you a little bit longer than you think, but we'll get there in the end. Just thinking if there is anything else. Yeah, and just the main thing about like if you don't have any direct experience, I wouldn't worry about that too much, in that, you know, it'd be great if you could do some volunteering and stuff like that, but obviously not everyone has the time or the financial capacity for that. So think about other things that you can draw on, like if the charity is part of a cause that you really care about and you do a lot of kind of reading on the area, or you kind of did some stuff at uni related to that, just really talk about that and they'll understand that, especially if it's like a grad placement, you might not have the direct skills imminently, obviously, if you just left uni. Okay, can I have my next slide, please? This is something that I actually asked Tom about, how essentially how honest should I be? Because I didn't want to make the picture too bleak, but I think it's stuff that I wish that someone had told me, because I think I had this vision that I'd start my master's in September and then, yeah, by the February, I'd have my dream job in a sex ed charity secured. And obviously that was not what happened. Like I said, it took a lot longer to find, which is fine. It's just something like to be aware of. And also, particularly with the third sector, there might be a little bit of compromise in that the role that I took with Fumble is only 3 days a week. Because the team is so small, no one works full time. So I had to be willing, or I was able to decide that I could work part-time for them, and I was like, okay, I'll find another part-time job alongside it. So alongside the 3 days at Fumble, I also work a retail job, which was something that I was like, I'll do it because it means that I can work for Fumble and I want to work for them. So that's something that obviously not everyone can have the option to do, but maybe consider it. Like if you're struggling to find charity to work for, could you do it differently, where you start out working part-time for one for a little while, and then obviously later on down the line you might transition to full-time. Also, I noticed when I was applying that a lot of charities are really pushing hybrid work. I think because if you're small and you don't want to shell out for an office space or something like that, or like cover transport, it might be that, again, like you work remotely in like your first job, and that's just something you have to decide if you want to do. I actually took the job at Fumble thinking that I don't really know why I agreed to work hybrid, because I'm not really kind of work from my room person, and I actually really like it, and it's been really helpful. And for me, it's like a nice balance. Like 3 days a week that I do from home is a nice contrast to the other days that I do in a massive, really busy retail job. Like I wouldn't want to do either of them for the whole week. So like it's a nice balance. So that's just something to think about as well, in terms of like, if you really want to get your foot in the door in the charity sector, would you be happy to work, say, part-time initially, just to kind of get in there if you can't find a full-time job straight away? That's not to say that full-time jobs aren't going in the charity sector, just so happened that the one I want had to be part-time. Just trying to think of everything else. Yeah, I feel like the other things I was going to say is just, I guess if you're here, you probably know this already, but obviously utilize the careers service. Like I was really big on taking basically all of my applications. I don't know how many times the careers service saw me. They must have hated me by the end of it. Everything that I applied for, I took it through them, because I was like, realistically, this, half an hour appointment and then say like an hour or two that I spend like making corrections to my application could be the difference between whether I get the job or not, and I have to keep applying and stuff. So definitely utilize that. And also I think there's something in, if you're someone like me who was kind of like, I have this vision of the job that I want, it might not work out like that, but it's important to remember that any job is a job and is going to give you really transferable skills. So whether that's the kind of job that you get initially isn't right up there with what you envisioned, but it's still something that you're going to get a lot of skills from and experience. Or if you're like me and you kind of have to work one job that you think is really cool and one job that like isn't really related to what you want to do, but again, like I just have to do it. I actually have a lot of skills for that, and it's stuff that like if I was applying for jobs now, I would talk a lot about. So just kind of remember that, and don't be, I guess, disheartened if your first job out of uni doesn't look like what you imagined. And yeah, just on that same note, I guess if you've just graduated, don't have to feel like you have to have the job that you would have like envisioned for yourself straight away. Like that's definitely something that I had to grapple with. So yeah, I think those are my main things. It's just maybe to like kind of reevaluate your expectations, but just in a kind of, I wish someone had told me that way. And you will get there. It might just take a little bit of time, but I also would say that it's much easier once you have that first job in the charity sector to then look for jobs, like future jobs once you're in it, rather than like when you just graduate. Obviously, it's a little bit harder. But it is possible. Like I was there, like I'm not going to get a job at the end of my master's, and I did, so it's fine. You can do it. And then also my last thing, can I have my next slide, please? I just tried to click on my own slides. This is my little plug, is that I obviously briefly spoke about Bumble and that they are a digital sex education charity. If anyone is interested and was like me and is like, they sound like someone I want to work for, you can sign up to the newsletter, and that's where they will put anything about volunteering opportunities, or if they do another graduate placement this year, it would be there. I think that's everything I have to say. It doesn't feel like a whole lot. So yeah, if anyone has any questions, please just go for it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jess. Really insightful. And I think, yeah, it's key there about it might not happen immediately, particularly in this sector. But yeah, do keep going, and also do keep using us. We won't hate you if you keep coming in, giving us lots of applications. Jess kept coming to see me, and I was more than happy to, as is anyone, of course. So yeah, do use us, and use us as much as you want. Cool. So over to our second speaker. We'll pass over to Ollie.
Hi folks, can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Cool. Yeah, so as Tom said, I'm Ollie. I am the Communications and Engagement Manager at Young Citizens. I'll just tell you a little bit about the charity first, a bit about what we do, where our money comes from, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, because Tom said it would be interesting for people to maybe hear how you get into a charity role through communications rather than another method, perhaps. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Sorry if it sounds like a bit of a CV, a sort of CV presentation, but hopefully it's interesting. And then I'll give a little bit of advice. So Young Citizens, we're a national education charity in the UK. We help schools and teachers to deliver citizenship education. You might remember that from school. It's basically everything but English, science and maths. So things like politics, democracy, learning about the law, learning about economics and the media, and helping you to become a more well-rounded, active citizen in society. We do that through free teaching resources and different kinds of immersive experiences, and we reach around 300,000 young people every year. And the ultimate goal of all this is to basically create stronger communities and a thriving democracy where everyone can take part. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, citizenship covers a few different topics, the law being one of them. So we run mock criminal trials. We run a massive competition every year where schools take part in mock trials. We also do democratic and political education campaigns and provide resources to run mock parliament within schools. We have lots of resources on economic literacy and media literacy as well. All the things that are kind of normally an afterthought in the classroom, we help teachers to deliver this, and everything we do is free for state schools. Next slide, please. Before I got into working for a charity, I kind of assumed that everything came from all the money that charities have to deliver what they do came from, individual people donating to charities, because that's kind of what you hear about when you hear about charity fundraising or maybe government funding. But that's just not where our funding comes from. So I thought it might be interesting to mention that we have a lot of different corporate partnerships. That's the main bulk of our funding model. It comes from corporate partners working with us to sponsor different programs, to run volunteering programs with their staff as part of their corporate social responsibility initiatives. So a kind of adjacent sector to the third sector is this world of sustainable development goals and corporate responsibility. So you can kind of be involved in the charity sector whilst working for a corporate, and vice versa if you want to. And yeah, that's how we're funded, as well as sort of larger grants. So you can apply for grants from foundations such as the Pears Foundation. Pears used to make soap and made millions and millions of pounds from it, and therefore now have a philanthropic initiative to support charities like ours within the youth and education sector. And we also get supported by the Bar Council, which looks after barristers and lawyers in the UK, and we get money from them to deliver our legal work. So yeah, I just thought I'd throw that in there as a bit of an interesting tidbit. Next slide, please. So what do I actually do all day? So we are, again, like Jess's charity, we are very small. We work nationally, but there's just 15 of us, and I'm the only person that does communication stuff for young citizens. Although everyone gets a little bit involved in communications in their own way, whether they're delivering the actual programs or writing our resources, I am the only person overseeing communications. And this involves firstly deciding our messaging strategy. So based on the programs and campaigns we're delivering, I help to strategize the key messages that we want to put out to our audiences. I'm trying to engage external partners, whether that be corporate partners, funders, volunteers, and of course schools, through launching campaigns and running our education programs. That involves launching email marketing campaigns, posting on social media, creating social media content, and also keeping our website up to date. And a kind of unexpected part of the role that I got involved in was data management. So looking after all our user engagement data on a platform called Salesforce, which is one of the biggest customer relationship management platforms out there. And I work with someone to help report on the success of what we do, basically, using that platform, as well as track all our mailing lists and things like that. So next slide, we'll talk a little bit about how I actually got here. I was always kind of interested in the charity sector. I volunteered. Well, I'm from Wigan, and I volunteered at Wigan Youth Zone when I lived here, as well as kind of working at a Bernardo's shop just to get some experience in retail and working behind a till. And during college, I also was interested in writing, and sort of volunteered to edit a college magazine. So I was already kind of interested in charities, interested in young people, interested in writing, and that kind of led me on to at university when I did an English degree to do some more writing at the Griffin, as well as having a part-time job at a cafe very briefly. And the kind of writing experience I got enabled me to get a job alongside a part-time master's at Wire and Hi-Fi Club, doing well, mainly to do some writing for them, but it kind of grew into doing more general social media and digital marketing stuff. Next slide, please. After that, I actually worked with Tom and Flo. I didn't realize you're going to be here, Flo, who's on the call, but I worked with those guys at the career service. It was a really, really good opportunity that was advertised, obviously, just through the university careers portal, to do a graduate internship at the career service. And this was so foundational for me in getting loads and loads of different skills, including those data analysis skills that I mentioned before. And it allowed me to continue pursuing communications skills, as well as working directly with people in education, i.e. students, to improve their outcomes and to get them thinking about skills that they need to develop. And so all of that kind of came together and enabled me to apply for the job that I now do at Young Citizens in communications. And yeah, I've been really, really happy at the charity, helping to try and tell the story of what we do. The point I was trying to make by talking about my journey, if we go on to the next slide, is that work experience is everything, really. I've been on hiring panels at Young Citizens and hired for different sorts of roles. And the main thing is that you need work experience. And if you can get work experience, do it. Obviously, you can do that through paid work, and I would definitely try and get paid for doing work during university. But if you're able to, as Jess mentioned, not everyone is able to, but if you can, do volunteering. As people that work in the charity sector, we will know that we know better than anyone that it really relies on volunteers. But we have over 1,000 volunteers every year to help us deliver what we do all around the country, and we literally just couldn't do it without them. So as well as getting the satisfaction of supporting whatever service users use that charity, and getting fulfillment from that, you get so much in return. You get work experience, you get to boost your network. In particular, you get to meet other people, and it's so much more likely that you'll be able to get a job at that charity or an adjacent charity after you've done that bit of volunteering, even if it is 1 hour per month, even if it is like 1 hour per week, you can manage that. It really helps to boost your CV and also practice skills. You're actually trying to put your skills into practice by doing that volunteering, and that will really strengthen your job applications and enable you to give evidence that you know what you're talking about and you know what you're doing, and also evidence that you care about whatever area that it is that you like, whether it be young people, whether it be a homeless charity, etc. Next slide, please. I just thought I'd mention some of the key skills that have been really important for me. I've touched on them already, but if you want to go into work at a charity, I think these are some of the biggest skills that you should take forward with you, and see if you can develop them either through your degree subjects or any work experience. Communication's required in every single role that you will ever do, I think. But at a charity, what's particularly important is campaigning and policy making. So if you really care about a certain area of policy, such as education policy, or what we're doing about poverty as a society, for example, then being able to demonstrate that is a good thing. All charities require a decent amount of data literacy, so being able to understand and analyze the data about your service users or about the people that are engaging with you is always a good thing. I saw when Jess showed that screenshot of the staff that she's got, there was quite a lot of program managers. Most charities will have program managers or project managers that help to keep the work on track. So if you can run a project or a program or an event, then that's really good skills you can take forward into the third sector. If you've ever done any sort of fundraising, like, I don't know, you've raised money doing a marathon or another fun run or some sort of event, that's great. And you can show that you know your way around budgeting and fundraising. And then general digital skills, can you use a computer, can you use Microsoft, Adobe, other programs, that's always helpful as well. I think that's everything that I've got to say, and I'm looking forward to answering any questions that you've got. So thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ollie. So yeah, I think there's a lot of lessons there about, showing, as Jess said, that it's not necessarily that you get there immediately or get straight to it, but that the skills you glean from different things are all relevant and all useful for pursuing a career in the third sector. So yeah, as we said, we'll move on to the Q&A now. Natalie's been dropping a few reminders, but do pop any questions you've got into the Q&A function at the top of your team screen there, and we'll get to those soon. But we have got a couple of pre-submitted questions that we'll start with. So first up, and we'll go maybe to Jess first, just so we can give Ollie's voice a little break after that talk. But what can you get out of a role in the third sector, do you think, that you perhaps wouldn't get in other sectors?
I feel like that's a big question. A lot,
Yes.
I think. I think the thing that I've really noticed working in the third sector is, I guess, the kind of like passion and commitment involved. Often, if you work in the third sector, the thing that your charity is based around might be either kind of contested or something that you have to fight for, which is definitely something that we experience in Fumble. And I think it's very nice that when you wake up in the morning and you see something kind of outrageous on the news, it's like, it's really cool. Like, I go to work somewhere where I'm surrounded by other people who also think this is really important and we need to make change and stuff like that. Not that you can't feel that way working not in the third sector, but I think it's very prolific in this area. And I also think, kind of like Ollie said, the communication skills, like obviously you need communication anywhere, but there's so much kind of fundraising and really pushing for why your charity should exist, why it should be fundraised for, why people should support it, that kind of thing. And that might lead you to communicate with like a whole different range of people that maybe you wouldn't in other roles. So yeah, I would say both of them.
Thank you very much, Ollie.
I would say I would agree with everything that Jess said, because we've had it recently where sort of the news came out about young people disliking the idea of democracy and favouring dictators or strongmen, like Trump style strongmen, and that been seeing that in the news and then knowing that we're trying to do something about that and educate people about democracy is really good. So you do get that satisfaction of being involved in current affairs if you're working for a charity. But also because we were comparing before, just before that we went live, that the University of Leeds, where I worked before, has so many different staff. You've got a massive team. Charities often are run on a shoestring, like very low limited resources, and that has actually allowed me to get involved in lots and lots of different things. I've not been siloed and just doing one particular thing. I've got to learn about the whole organization because you're drafted in to work across it all. So I think what you do get definitely is lots and lots of different skills and experiences. It can be like stressful and it can be full on, but I don't think there's any job that isn't. But yeah, I think I've got to learn about the full range of what a charity does and what it can offer.
Yeah, really good point there. And we advertise a lot of opportunities with SMEs, small to medium-sized enterprises as well. And yeah, while everyone knows about the big graduate employers and they've got advantages, there's definitely the ability sort of early in your career to pick up a lot more from working in small organizations sometimes. So yeah, thank you very much for that. So we've got a question in the Q&A from Holly. So thanks a lot, Holly, for that. And it's specifically for Ollie, although I think I will see, Jess, if you've got anything to add alongside that. But when you applied for your role as a communications and engagement manager, did they ask you to create something alongside your interview? For example, a social media campaign?
Yeah, they did actually. So the original role I applied for was a communications and digital marketing role, and then the role changed to be a little bit broader after a while. And yeah, I was definitely asked to do an example social media post, like a brief outline of a campaign around a particular teaching resource that they were about to launch. I think it was about like a climate action resource for COP26. And I had to write a few different versions of that social media post and maybe explain a little bit about why I chose to do what I did. On that point, it's really, really useful if you are applying for communications roles to have a portfolio of stuff to send in with your application if they allow for it. So if you've done any graphic design work, if you've done any published writing, that can really strengthen an application. If you can prove that you're already a published writer or that you just can write, it's always useful to send examples of work that you've done.
And Jess, what were you asked to do for your interview?
So same kind of thing actually, based on like a project that Vomble were looking into delivering. They asked me to plan or kind of come up with an idea for how would I reach out to university societies to work with if I got the job at Vomble, which is something that I actually did once I got the job. So they wanted me to kind of research different societies that I think we could work with based on obviously what their kind of calls were and how we could engage them. So like what would be our way to kind of market ourselves to them to work with them, and also kind of design what the campaign would look like. So what would we do with them to kind of spread the message about Vomble and engage with students. So it was kind of like what Ollie said, based on a project that they wanted to carry out. They basically were testing me to see what would I do if I was given the role. So I think that's kind of a good thing to prepare for. Obviously, if you get to the interview, if you can kind of look at the projects that they're doing, or yeah, just kind of have an idea of what you would do if they were to ask you about some of their kind of like aims and upcoming stuff. Like, how could you show that you have an idea about that?
I think it's also worth being prepared to be asked to do some sort of presentation as well. It is quite a common thing, maybe in the second round of an interview process, to have to do a 10-minute presentation where you might talk through a proposed campaign or something like that. So brushing up on your like presentation skills is always useful. We've even, when we've been hiring for roles, we've even got people to do data analysis tasks, you know, as a half an hour like assessment as part of that process as well. So getting ready to use Excel as well is always useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's good advice for any sector and any interview you ever do to look at the organization and see what they're doing and see what they're up to and campaigns they're doing and that sort of thing. But particularly with this sector, I think it's pretty vital. So yeah, good advice from both of you there. So another question from the Q&A. We've talked about some of the positives, but I think it's also important as Jess was saying during her presentation to be honest about some of the drawbacks as well. So what are some of the main drawbacks about working in the third sector that people should consider before pursuing a career in it? Jess, I'll go to you first on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah. I think the obvious one is funding. Like, that's such a massive thing for charities, and obviously different charities will be at different stages, and their kind of level of financial security obviously will be completely different, but that's something to consider. So for example, with my grad placement, it's 10 months, it runs until July, and when I was offered the role, I was told the idea is that we will keep you on, but we can't guarantee that until close to the time because of funding. So obviously, depending on your circumstance, that might not be something that you're comfortable with. And then in which case, you'd want to kind of work for someone who you kind of know that they have, say, a year or two's running costs rather than, just the next 10 months or something. So that is something to consider. But I also think that the charities themselves are obviously very aware of that, and they would be, hopefully are very upfront about that in the way that obviously I was told, we can't guarantee that you'll have a job for 10 years because they're not going to know that until the funding comes in. But that's just something to keep in mind. I would also say, I guess it's the flip of what I said earlier, in that like it's really nice working somewhere where you feel like you're very engaged with current affairs and you're making change and stuff, but obviously that can be hard. Like, it can be really hard to kind of wake up and see that there's plenty of people out there and plenty of people in power who don't agree with what you're doing. Or if you ever kind of get, like, we often get, kind of really stupid comments on our social media and stuff. And I think most of the time it's fine. Like, you just kind of, it doesn't really bother you. But obviously, that's not to say that you won't get something that's quite difficult, or like comments that people make. Or we recently had a complaint, completely invalid actually what the person was trying to say, but the kind of sentiment behind it was really, really not very nice to hear. And like, that's just something that you probably are a bit more exposed to in this sector, especially, I guess, the more kind of taboo the nature of your charity is. But then the thing to remember is that obviously people only have something to say about you because you exist as a charity and you're doing something that they don't like, because you're kind of making a statement and promoting this change. And again, that's something that charities are prepared for. Like, we all kind of have crisis plans, and you know what to do if somebody, says something, or if you get, kind of abusive comments online, that kind of thing. And obviously it's something that all the team will feel. You can kind of talk about it together, and again, you can all bring back the positivity, and that, you're all working for the same cause, and you all think that, it's really important, all this kind of stuff. It's just something that maybe in other areas, that kind of mental challenge, for want of a better word, isn't something that you might experience. But then it's like, you're doing it because you're making a difference. So it's just kind of up to you about how you would feel about that. Like, if the charity is something that's really close to your heart, that might be hard to hear, but you just kind of have to decide if you can do that. And I think ultimately you can. It's not nice in the moment when someone on the internet has something stupid to say, but it's fine.
That was really interesting. Luckily, with the subject area of what we do, we don't get as much of abuse online, and that sounds really awful. So sorry you have to deal with that, Jess. In terms of what I think drawbacks are, the very obvious one is salary. If money is really, really important to you, then you might need to consider your options. But if you feel like you can work in a charity, I would thoroughly recommend it, even though it cannot offer the compensation that a private sector job would. All good charities will pay, a very reasonable wage, especially some of the bigger charities. They pay pretty much as a private sector organisation, but salary is something to consider. That so have a look at what's out there, and feel like, and assess what you feel is possible. The other thing that I would mention is that we are just extremely busy because of the amount of resource we've got. But again, that keeps things fresh and exciting. It's definitely not boring. I think just very, very quickly, we did we did have to sort of get our crisis communications plan out once due to a complaint about some of where our funding comes from. Someone took an issue with that. So that's an example of how in our work, things don't always go to plan, and people might have issues with the way things are set up. But that, I think that's the same for pretty much any organization. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your honest answers there, both of you. Another question in the Q&A is around how do I get experience that's relevant? And I will go to, I think, Ollie first for that.
Was the question, how do I get experience that's relevant? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Broadly and within reason, I think all experience can be made to be relevant, obviously within reason, but any work experience you can get, I think you can tailor that experience to the job that you're applying for. You really don't have to have worked, for example, if we were taking an application from someone that hadn't worked in a youth or education space, it wouldn't be discarded. As long as the experience that candidate had got was, it was explained properly and it was applied to the essential criteria in the job description. When you're looking at a job, just look at what the essential criteria is. If you feel like you can get close to it, then go for it. In terms of getting that experience, though, obviously it can be beneficial and desirable to have experience that is relevant, in inverted commas. And so I would come back to the volunteering thing. There are so many different ways you can volunteer, even if it's a very small amount of time. You can even do it virtually, digitally, so you don't even have to be there in person. A charity on the other side of the world that you really care about might benefit from you getting involved remotely, doing some campaigning from your own social media channels, for example, or doing a little bit of free work for them in some way. So that's what I would recommend.
I think, yeah, basically I would say the exact same, that all experience is relevant experience. And if you kind of don't know how to market that and how to talk about your experience, that's something that I think the career service really helped with. Like, I was always really bad in my undergrad at being like, how can I talk about, the stuff that seems really irrelevant and make it relevant? But it all teaches you really useful skills. So when I was at uni, I volunteered for Sexpression, which are another sex ed charity. So obviously that was like basically exactly the same stuff. But I also was on the committee for a sports society, which on paper is not relevant at all. But we did fundraising. Obviously, I did a lot of like administrative and organizational stuff, which you can kind of market that like everyone needs those skills, like that's still relevant experience. Also, yeah, again, the volunteering, if you have the time to do that, obviously that's really helpful. You can also, if there's charities that you want to work for and you feel like you don't have the skills yet to work for them, you can email them and say, hi, do you need volunteers? Like, we must get once or twice a week someone emails Vonbot and says, hi, I want to like work for you. Can I do so many hours a week, just like volunteering? Can I do this, whatever? Granted, small charities don't always have the capacity to take that on, but if you get a yes, then that's great. Like, you'll have direct experience with an organization that you want to work for. If it's a no, it'll only be a no because we don't have the space to organize that, but obviously it's always really appreciated. And then if you apply again for a job in the future, like, we will know that you wanted to volunteer with us, and obviously that's a very nice thing that you've offered to do. Or yeah, again, if you can volunteer and it's not with the kind of ideal organization, it doesn't matter. It's still experience and connections within those charities. Again, that's another thing, I hate to bang on about LinkedIn. If you can kind of follow people and connect with organizations and just say like, I'm looking to get my foot in the door in this organization or within this kind of sector, is there any volunteering that I can do? Like, it can't hurt to ask. And worst case scenario, someone's going to say no and that's it, but they could say yes, and then that could be the difference between you getting that job or not. But equally, on the flip side, not everyone has the time to volunteer. So if you can't, then I would just think about the skills that you already have and how you can talk about them. And yeah, even like you're through your degree and stuff, you might not feel like it's directly relevant, but there definitely will be ways to talk about it. For example, like if you did research for a dissertation, like what did you do for that? Did you carry out interviews and stuff? Again, even if the topic isn't completely relevant, those kind of skills and the kind of organizational stuff that you would have had to do would all count. So yeah, don't feel like you have to go out and get more experience if you can't. Just think about how you can market the skills that you already have.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I think to sort of put a just to expand on a couple of things Jess mentioned there. I think firstly, yeah, directly reaching out to people and sort of putting yourself out there is really good. The worst case scenario is that they say no or haven't got the time and your name is on their minds. And also that point about experience and what's relevant or not, you know, be creative with how you think about it, think about your course, think about sort of any casual experience, you know, to use retail as an example, that still gives you time management, customer service, communications. Do think outside the box if you're lacking it, and also think about how it ties in with your motivations. I think particularly for people at early stage of the career or sort of graduate internships or placements and that sort of thing, motivation and relevant experience can be as important as sort of you know, some more established examples to think about your experience and what you want to get out of it. And yeah, that's really, really helpful. Ollie, you had something to add there.
I was just going to say that use, like, as Tom said just then, like using your course to get the skills. I did an English degree, and it kind of didn't dawn on me at the time that I could have been using that to boost my CV. Firstly, in the optional modules that you choose, I mean, I did end up doing a module about that had a practical element to it, working with a museum in the Yorkshire Dales, and it was an English language module. So that gave that little group that was doing that module real work experience in an actual place, running a project. But also, when you choose to do your dissertation, think about how that can demonstrate different skills, such as choose to do a research-based or qualitative or quantitative-based dissertation that, you know, that can then show an employer, look, I've done this kind of research before, and I can do data analysis, and as well as just being able to write an essay. So yeah, think about how you can just make the most of your course and what you choose to do.
Great, thanks a lot, Ollie. Sort of, I guess, a bit more hypothetical. What do you think? You're both working in the third sector at the moment. What other things do you think you might have gone into if you hadn't ended up in the third sector? And perhaps in the future, what other careers have you considered that you might be interested in? So maybe after this, Jess, I'll start with you if that's all right.
That's really hard because I couldn't imagine not working in the third sector. I don't think I could work in like some kind of big corporate job. I just think that doesn't really align with my values. So like other jobs that I did apply for when I was applying for Fumble, actually numerous jobs with the career service, didn't get them, it's fine. But again, it's the same kind of vibe of like, I think the classic thing, I must have said this so many times in my interview at Fumble, is like helping people. Like that's kind of what I wanted to do. So I was like, I'd work in somewhere like the career service or at uni supporting like students and graduates. Like that was something that I also thought was really interesting. So it probably would have been something like that, if not the third sector. In future, if I'm not in the third sector, the only other thing I can envision myself going into is academia, but then that's basically just a cop out because I'm fighting for the same cause as I would in a charity. I'm just doing the research for it rather than like working for a charity. So yeah, I think that's it really. I don't know. I'll have to think about what I would do if I'm not in the third sector.
An honest answer is still an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I never found working for a big sort of private corporation that attractive. I wanted to work for something either kind of partly publicly funded, so maybe a role in the civil service. Again, with you working for the civil service, you get to be heavily involved in deciding policy and current affairs. And in the charity, you're on the flip side of that, maybe trying to influence that policy. So yeah, maybe a civil service role, or maybe a role within the culture and heritage space, because a lot, again, they kind of function like charities a lot of the time, being taking public money or fundraising. So a role within culture and heritage potentially I could have looked at, and then universities as well. I really enjoyed working for University of Leeds, and like would definitely consider it again in the future. So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of overlap between sort of the third sector and the higher education sector. So, you know, if it is something that interests you, potentially the third sector, consider higher education as well as a sort of near alternative. So yeah, we have a question there from Farhan. I don't know for certain how much either of you know about this, but I'll put it out to you both anyway. What are the prospects for international graduates in the third sector, and do you have any advice for them?
Jess, do you know?
I don't really know. The only thing I'm going off of is that there were a few times when I was applying for charity jobs and they did kind of say that it was UK only based on like sponsorship. Obviously, I don't know enough about the details because that didn't apply to me. I don't know, yeah, exactly how that works. I think you would just have to, if they haven't made it clear, just ask that. I'm not sure. Obviously, if you do something remote, then it doesn't matter. But yeah, I can't say any more than that.
Yeah, it totally depends on whether the charity can sponsor you to work in the UK. But there are obviously global charities out there, international development organizations, for example, that will, if you are able to travel and work all over the place, all over the world, then your prospects will probably be pretty good for those sorts of roles, or working within United Nations style roles as well. So in fact, being an international graduate might stand you in good stead for something like that.
Yeah, I think I'd echo, you know, sponsorship's going to be the big hurdle to overcome there, and the nature of, you know, what Ollie and Jess have both spoken about there, where it's not a sector with high salaries and it might not be a sector with full-time roles and loads of roles. I think educating yourself as much as possible is a good idea, and sort of going to charities when you apply well armed with the education you need. We did do a session a couple of weeks ago about working in the UK as an international graduate, which might have some general good advice for you that you can take into that. But yeah, it's probably about educating yourself as much as possible, and yeah, sort of going from there. Thank you very much for that. We're coming towards the end of our allocated time. I can't see any more questions. So before we wrap up, just want to ask if there's any further questions from any further sort of things you want to finish on from either of you. It looks like that's a no. But yeah, so yeah, thank you both so much for your time, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Really good to see you all, and thanks for asking so many questions of Ollie and Jess. We do have a very brief feedback form that Natalie's going to put in the chat. It'd be great if you could fill that in. It just helps us to know sort of what you liked and what we can maybe improve upon for next time. So please do fill that in. If you've got any further questions, then do feel free to get in touch with us at the Careers Centre. The session was recorded, so we'll send around the recording after that as well. But yeah, and do get in touch with us, book appointments to us if you need any further support with applications, interviews, or anything else. But yeah, thank you very much to Jess and to Wally, and yeah, we'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.
Thanks very much.